My name is Alice. I've always thought of it as a quiet name, a name for someone who observes from the corners of rooms, who listens more than she speaks. It suited me well growing up in Port Blossom, a town nestled on the Oregon coast where the fog rolls in like a soft gray blanket, muffling the world and blurring the edges of things. Our town lives and breathes on two things: the relentless rhythm of the Pacific and the delicate art of appearances. My family, the Beaumonts, were masters of the latter. My father, Richard, was a man built of quiet disappointments, a financial advisor who treated our family's budget like a failing stock he was duty-bound to manage. My mother, Beatrice, was the true architect of our lives. Her ambition was a relentless, glittering force, and its primary vessel was the Beaumont Frame, the art gallery and custom framing shop she co-owned in the heart of town. It wasn't just a business, it was her stage, a curated space where she could present a flawless version of herself to the world. And then there was my sister Stella. 2 years my junior, Stella was my mother's masterpiece. She was beautiful, vivacious, and moved through life with the effortless confidence of someone who has never been told she is anything less than perfect. I was the backdrop, the muted gray of the Port Blossom fog against which Stella's vibrant colors could truly shine. I was the designated driver in our family's aging but respectable Volvo wagon. I was the one who ran errands, who picked Stella up from her endless flute lessons and drama club rehearsals, who made sure the house was pristine before my mother's Art World associates came for dinner. My role was to be reliable, to be functional, to be the sturdy, unseen scaffolding that held up the beautiful facade of the Beaumont family. I accepted this role because, for a long time, I believed it was the only way to earn my place. A "thank you, Alice" was a rare and precious commodity. More often, it was "don't be late, Alice," or "did you remember to polish the silver, Alice?" The requests were always framed as necessities for the family's good, which really meant for my mother's reputation or Stella's comfort. I remember the day it all changed with a clarity that still chills me. It was a Tuesday in late October. The sky had been spitting a cold, persistent drizzle all day, the kind that seeps into your bones. The gallery was hosting its annual autumn gala, the most important event on my mother's calendar. It was a night of hushed networking, expensive wine, and the unveiling of a new collection from a celebrated Portland artist. My mother had been a storm of nervous energy for weeks, her voice a clipped, frantic thing. My task for the evening was simple, yet crucial. I was to pick up Stella from a pre-gala reception at the mayor's house and ferry her to the gallery. She had the centerpiece floral arrangement for the main hall in her care, a ridiculously opulent creation of white lilies and silver-dusted eucalyptus that had cost a small fortune. "Alice, you must be careful," my mother had instructed, her hands fluttering with anxiety as she adjusted her silk shawl. "The roads are slick, and those flowers are more important than you can imagine. Don't you dare let anything happen to them." I remember the scent of the car, damp wool, and the faint, cloying sweetness of a forgotten air freshener. Rain drummed a hypnotic rhythm on the roof. Stella, beside me, was scrolling through her phone, bathed in its blue-white light. "Can you believe Mom?" she said, not looking up. "She's acting like the fate of the free world depends on this stupid party." "It's important to her," I said softly, my knuckles white on the steering wheel as I navigated a slick curve. "Everything is important to her," Stella sighed, tapping at her screen. "Oh, look, Carl posted a picture from the gala already. His suit is amazing. I need to look perfect." I didn't answer. I was focused on the road, on the way the headlights of oncoming cars refracted through the rain-streaked windshield, creating dazzling, dangerous starbursts. We were on the Old Coast Highway, a winding stretch of road that hugged the cliffs overlooking the sea. To my left, the world fell away into a churning, black abyss where waves crashed against the rocks below. The sound was a low, constant roar beneath the patter of the rain. I felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach, the pressure to be perfect, to be careful, to not be the one who caused a problem. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I remember the sound of it, a shaky, small thing in the cavern of the car. It was the kind of breath you take when you're trying to convince yourself that the faint whisper of dread in your gut is just your imagination. We were less than 5 minutes from the gallery when it happened. I was coming around a particularly sharp, unlit bend known to locals as Widow's Turn. A deer, sleek and terrified, leaped from the dense curtain of pines directly into my path. I swerved. It was a pure, unthinking reaction. The tires, worn thinner than my father's patience, lost their tenuous grip on the wet asphalt. For a single, horrifying second, the car felt weightless, like a boat lifted by a massive wave. The world didn't flip. It tilted, a sickening, slow-motion spin. Stella screamed, a sharp, piercing sound. The floral arrangement flew from her lap, a spray of water and petals. My own scream was trapped in my throat, a choked knot of terror. Then came the impact. A sound not of metal screaming, but of a deep, resonant thump, like a giant's fist hitting the earth. The car slammed into the thick trunk of an ancient Douglas fir that stood sentinel at the road's edge. My head snapped forward, cracking against the steering wheel. A universe of white-hot stars exploded behind my eyes. The world went silent, save for the gentle, indifferent drumming of the rain on the roof. I drifted in a sea of gray confusion. Time had no meaning. There was a dull, throbbing ache in my head and a sharp, metallic taste in my mouth. My left leg was pinned at an unnatural angle, consumed by a strange, buzzing numbness. The passenger side, where Stella had been, was miraculously untouched, but my door was crumpled inward, pressing against my ribs. The airbag, a dusty, acrid-smelling pillow, had deflated against my chest. My first coherent thought was for my sister. "Stella," I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. "Oh my God," she was sobbing, her voice thin and reedy. "Oh my God, Alice, the flowers are ruined. Mom is going to kill us. She's going to kill us." I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my vision. Through the shattered web of the windshield, I saw a familiar pair of headlights approaching. My parents' SUV. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made me weep. They were here. We were safe. The SUV screeched to a halt beside us. My mother leaped out, her face a mask of panic in the strobing hazard lights. She didn't run to my side of the car. She ran to Stella's, yanking the door open. "Stella, are you all right? The gala, we're going to be late." Her voice was a high-pitched shriek, cutting through the night. My father was slower. He got out and walked to the front of our crumpled Volvo, his hands on his hips, surveying the damage with a grimace. "Damn it," he muttered. "This is going to cost a fortune to fix. I told you to be careful, Alice." They didn't look at me. Not once. Not as I groaned, a low, pained sound. Not as I felt a warm trickle of blood run from my temple down my cheek. Stella was being bundled out of the car, wrapped in my mother's arms. "My dress," Stella cried, pointing to a small tear in the silk. "It's ripped. And the flowers are everywhere." "We'll fix it, baby, we'll fix it," my mother soothed, hustling her toward their car. "We can't miss the artist's speech. It's the centerpiece of the whole evening." I was still pinned, the pressure on my leg growing into a searing agony. "Dad," I managed, my voice barely audible over the rain. "Please, help me. I can't feel my leg." He finally turned his head and looked at me. His gaze wasn't angry or concerned, it was just annoyed. It was the look he gave the toaster when it burned his bread. "An inconvenience. You got yourself into this mess, Alice," he said, his voice flat. "You can figure out how to get yourself out." And then they were gone. The red taillights of their SUV disappeared around the bend, leaving me alone in the wreckage, in the dark, in the cold, relentless rain. The sound of the ocean below the cliff seemed to grow louder, a hungry, indifferent roar. I lay there, trapped and bleeding, and understood a truth so profound and terrible it felt like a second impact. I was not a daughter. I was a problem they had just driven away from. I don't know how long I lay there, suspended between shock and a deep, encroaching cold. The world was a blur of pain and the rhythmic sweep of the one remaining windshield wiper, smearing the rain across the broken glass. A desperate, animal instinct for survival finally flickered to life. Sobbing, I used my good arm to unbuckle my seatbelt. The movement sent a bolt of fire through my ribs. I dragged myself, inch by excruciating inch, across the seat, over shards of glass that bit into my hands and knees, toward the passenger door that Stella had left ajar. I kicked it open with my good leg and tumbled out onto the wet, gravelly shoulder of the road. I lay there, a broken heap on the asphalt, the rain washing the blood from my face into the thirsty ground. It felt like an eternity, but the police report later said it was 22 minutes before a battered pickup truck, smelling of salt and diesel, pulled over. An old fisherman named Jed, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, knelt beside me, his presence a beacon of simple, human kindness. He covered me with a coarse wool blanket from his truck and spoke to the 911 dispatcher in a calm, steady voice that was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The hospital was a world of sterile white and beeping machines. I drifted in and out of consciousness, a landscape of pain medication and fragmented nightmares. The diagnosis was severe: a fractured femur, 3 broken ribs, and a concussion that left the world swimming for days. They operated on my leg, inserting a titanium rod to hold the bone together. When I finally woke up, clear-headed and aching in a starched hospital bed, the room was empty. My parents weren't there. They didn't come that night, nor the next day. A kind nurse with warm hands told me they had called. They had wanted to know when I would be discharged and what the insurance situation was. They finally appeared on the 3rd day, not because they were worried, but because the hospital needed a guardian's signature for the upcoming physical therapy assessments. My mother walked in holding a cup of coffee from a fancy downtown cafe. She didn't look at the cast on my leg or the bruises that painted my face in shades of purple and blue. She looked at the clipboard in the nurse's hand. "You'll have to get a job to start paying this off, you know," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Your father and I aren't made of money, Alice." My father stood by the door, his arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. "Maybe this will teach you to be more careful on the road," he grumbled. There was no "Are you okay?" No, we were so scared. There was only liability and inconvenience. Later that day, a friend from school visited and, trying to be cheerful, showed me her phone. "Look, Stella posted about you," she said. I took the phone with a trembling hand. There was a photo of Stella at the gala, smiling dazzlingly, a glass of champagne in her hand. The caption read, "Such a scary night with the car accident, but so glad we made it to the gala in time to support the amazing artists. Family is everything. Sending all my love and prayers for my sister's speedy recovery. #blessed, #family first, #art for life." The comments were a chorus of fawning sympathy. "So brave of you to still go. Your family is so strong. Hope your sister's okay, but you look stunning, Stella." I stared at the screen, at the smiling face of my sister, at the hollow, performative words, and something inside me, something that had been soft and yielding and desperate for their approval, began to harden. It wasn't a snap, it was a slow, quiet freezing. The fog in my own mind began to clear, and for the first time, I saw my family not as I wished they were, but as they truly were. They had left me for dead to save face at a party. My survival was not a relief to them, but a bill. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter in my heart. I was something else now. I was a survivor. And I knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the titanium rod in my leg, that I would have to be the one to build my own foundation, my own frame, my own life. And I would build it far away from them. Recovery was a slow, humbling pilgrimage. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and was then sent home with a walker and a long list of physical therapy appointments. My mother insisted I recover at home rather than a rehabilitation facility, not out of love, but because, as she put it, "We can't afford to have you taking up a bed someone else needs." Life at home was a masterclass in quiet neglect. My room, which was on the 2nd floor, was impractical. They moved me into the small, dusty study on the ground floor. My old bedroom, as Stella cheerfully informed me during one of her rare visits to my bedside, was now being used for her wardrobe overflow. She even showed me a video she'd made for her friends, a tour of her new closet, my old furniture buried under piles of designer clothes. I watched it on my phone, tears of quiet humiliation tracing paths down my cheeks. I became a ghost in my own house. My days were measured by the clock, medication at 8 a.m., stretching exercises at 10 a.m., the arrival of the home care physical therapist at 2 p.m. My parents moved around me as if I were a piece of furniture they kept bumping into. My mother would leave a tray of food by my bed without a word. My father would pointedly read the newspaper in the living room, sighing heavily whenever my walker scraped against the hardwood floors. It was during this period of forced stillness that I started to truly listen. I was no longer a participant in the family's life. I was a silent observer. And what I learned was devastating. One afternoon, I was resting on the sofa, feigning sleep, when my mother came into the room talking on the phone. Her voice was a low, conspiratorial whisper. "No, Mark, of course we can't," she was saying, her back to me. "The terms are perfectly clear. The principal cannot be accessed until the beneficiary reaches the age of 25, or in the event of her, The accident wasn't. It wasn't that. It's infuriating. All that capital, just sitting there, when we have gallery expansion costs to consider." A cold dread, sharper than any physical pain I had felt, washed over me. I knew what she was talking about. When my sister and I were born, our grandfather had set up trust funds for each of us. They weren't enormous, but they were substantial, enough for a down payment on a house or to start a business. I knew the terms vaguely, but I had never paid much attention. Now, my mother's words clicked into place with horrifying precision. They hadn't just left me on the side of the road. In the days that followed, while I lay in a hospital bed, they had contacted the family lawyer, Mark, to see if my accident was a loophole, a way to get their hands on my inheritance. My near death was, to them, a potential financial opportunity they had been denied. That was the final piece. The illusion of family, already cracked and shattered, crumbled into dust. There was no love there to salvage, no misunderstanding to forgive. There was only a cold, transactional self-interest. My tears stopped. A quiet, steely resolve took their place. I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to build a life so strong and so beautiful that their world, with its shallow foundations and hollow frames, would seem like a distant, pathetic memory. My plan began to form in the quiet hours of the night, fueled by pain medication and a burning need for self-preservation. I focused on my recovery with a singular, fierce determination. Every painful stretch, every step with the walker, was a step away from them. I found a part-time, remote job doing data entry for a small accounting firm, work I could do from my laptop in the study. I saved every single dollar, hiding the cash in an old shoebox under my bed. I applied to the University of Washington's architecture program. Seattle felt right, far enough away to be a true escape, a city of glass and steel and innovation, a place where people built new things. I was accepted. The day I left, 6 months after the accident, was cool and misty. I was walking with only a slight limp, the titanium rod in my leg a secret, inner strength. I packed one suitcase with my clothes, my books, and the shoebox of cash. I waited until my father had left for work and my mother was at the gallery. I left a short, simple note on the perfectly polished dining room table. "I have moved to Seattle to attend university. I will be in touch when I am settled." I didn't say goodbye to Stella. There was nothing left to say. I called a taxi to take me to the bus station, and as we drove out of Port Blossom, I watched the familiar foggy coastline recede in the rearview mirror without a single tear. I wasn't running away from something. I was driving toward myself. The next 7 years were a quiet renaissance. Seattle was everything Port Blossom was not, anonymous, sprawling, and humming with a vibrant, forward-looking energy. I thrived. I shed the name Beaumont and the weight that came with it, legally taking my grandmother's maiden name, Wallace. Alice Wallace. It sounded like someone who was her own person. I dove into my studies. Architecture fascinated me, the art of creating space, of building structures that were both beautiful and functional, that could shelter and inspire. I was particularly drawn to restorative design, the practice of transforming old, neglected buildings into new, life-giving spaces. It felt deeply personal. I worked 2 jobs to support myself, as a barista in the early mornings and a drafter's assistant in the afternoons. I was perpetually tired but deeply, profoundly happy. I was building something that was entirely mine. I made friends, real friends, who knew me as Alice Wallace, the driven and talented architecture student, not the Beaumont's quiet, overlooked daughter. I even met a kind professor, a woman named Dr. Lena Petrova, who became my mentor. She saw a spark in me I didn't know I had and pushed me to take on challenging projects, to find my own design voice. After graduating with honors, I took a job with a prestigious firm in Portland that specialized in historical renovations. I was good at it. I had an intuitive understanding of the bones of old buildings, of how to honor their history while breathing new life into them. I bought a small, sunny condo overlooking the Willamette River. I adopted a scruffy dog from a shelter. I built a life of quiet joy, of meaningful work, of genuine connection. I kept in minimal contact with my family. A sterile Christmas card each year, a brief, impersonal email on birthdays. I learned from a Port Blossom acquaintance that the Beaumont frame was more successful than ever. My mother had become a minor local celebrity, the doyenne of the coastal art scene. Stella, after a failed attempt at an acting career in Los Angeles, had returned home and now worked as the gallery's creative director, a title that mostly involved planning parties and managing the gallery's Instagram account. They seemed to have forgotten I existed, which was the greatest gift they had ever given me. The opportunity came on a rainy Tuesday in March, almost 8 years to the day after the accident. I received an email with a subject line that made my heart stop, regarding the Beaumont frame. It was from Theodore Finch, my mother's business partner. He was a gentle, elderly man whom I remembered fondly from my childhood, a true art lover who had always seemed out of place next to my mother's sharp-edged ambition. He was retiring, he wrote. He was tired of the business, tired of my mother's relentless social climbing, and wanted to sell his 50% share in the gallery, and, more importantly, in the historic brick building that housed it. He had heard through the grapevine of my success in Portland and was writing to me first, as a courtesy. "I always thought you had a good head on your shoulders, Alice," he wrote. "And frankly, I'd rather sell to you than to any of Beatrice's sycophants." I read the email 3 times. My hands were shaking. It wasn't about revenge. The fire of that old anger had long ago cooled into a quiet resolve. This was about something else. It was about closing a circle. It was about taking the very space that represented my family's shallow values and transforming it into something meaningful. It was the ultimate act of restorative design. I called Mr. Finch that afternoon. We spoke for over an hour. He was candid about his frustrations with my mother, her focus on profit over art, on celebrity over community. I told him my vision, not to continue the gallery as it was, but to repurpose the building. To create a collaborative, accessible arts center for the community. A place for workshops, affordable studio spaces for emerging artists, and a gallery that showcased local talent, not just established names with high price tags. He was silent for a moment when I finished. Then he said, his voice thick with emotion, that is what this place was always meant to be. "The building is yours, Alice, if you want it." The deal was finalized quietly over the next 2 months through our lawyers. I used the money from my grandfather's trust, which had come to me untouched, on my 20th birthday, along with my own savings to purchase Mr. Finch's half of the building. I was now a 50% owner of 14 Tidal Street, Port Blossom. My mother, Beatrice Beaumont, was my business partner. And she had no idea. I waited. I learned from Mr. Finch that my mother was planning the gallery's 25th anniversary gala. It was to be the biggest, most extravagant event in the town's history. She was pouring tens of thousands of dollars into it, securing a famous caterer from Seattle, flying in a string quartet, and inviting art critics from up and down the coast. The local paper was already running breathless articles about it. It was the apex of her social reign. I let her plan. I let her spend the money. I let her print the lavish invitations. I chose my moment carefully. The day of the gala was bright and windswept, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. I drove down the coast from Portland, the sea a glittering expanse to my right. I didn't feel nervous or angry. I felt calm. I was no longer the frightened girl in the crumpled Volvo. I was Alice Wallace, an architect, a business owner, a woman who knew her own worth. I arrived at the gallery in the mid-afternoon. The street was bustling with delivery vans and event staff. Inside, chaos reigned. Florists were arranging towering displays of orchids, caterers were setting up champagne flutes, and a frazzled-looking Stella was directing lighting technicians with dramatic hand gestures. My mother stood in the center of it all, a queen surveying her court, wearing a severe black dress and a look of triumphant stress. I walked in quietly. I was wearing simple, well-tailored gray trousers, a silk blouse, and a blazer. I carried a leather portfolio under my arm. For a moment, no one noticed me. I was just another face in the crowd. Then Stella's eyes landed on me. Her mouth fell open. "Alice," she stammered. "What are you doing here? You weren't invited." Her voice cut through the noise. The activity in the room slowed. My mother turned, her eyes narrowing as she saw me. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, then it hardened into a familiar mask of annoyance. "Alice, this is hardly the time for a family reunion," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We're extremely busy. If you've come to grovel for a ticket, you're too late." I didn't react to her jibe. I simply walked toward her, my footsteps steady on the polished concrete floor. I stopped a few feet in front of her. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, my voice even and clear. I opened my portfolio and took out a sheaf of legal documents. "I'm not here for the party. I'm here on business." I handed the papers to her. "As of 2 months ago, I acquired Theodore Finch's full 50% share in this building and the business assets. As your new partner, and per the dissolution clause in your original partnership agreement, I am exercising my right to terminate our current business model. The Beaumont frame is officially dissolved." A profound silence fell over the room. The florists, the caterers, the technicians, everyone stopped and stared. My mother looked down at the papers, then back up at me, her face a comical picture of disbelief and sputtering rage. "You, what?" she hissed. "This is a joke. This is some kind of sick, pathetic joke." "It's no joke," I said calmly. "My lawyer has already filed the paperwork with the state. This gala is canceled. And per the terms of the building's co-ownership agreement, your lease on this gallery space is terminated. You have 30 days to vacate the premises and remove your personal property." Stella let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a shriek. "You can't do this." "Mom, she can't do this." My father, who had just arrived to oversee the valet parking, pushed his way through the stunned onlookers. "What in God's name is going on here?" he blustered. My mother thrust the papers at him. "Your daughter has lost her mind. She's trying to destroy us." She turned back to me, her eyes blazing with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. "After everything we did for you," she seethed. "You ungrateful child. You were always a disappointment." I looked at her, at this woman who had left me bleeding on the side of a road, and I felt nothing but a distant, quiet pity. The power she'd had over me was gone. "You did nothing for me," I said, my voice still quiet, but carrying in the silent room. "You built your life on appearances. But the foundation was always rotten. This isn't about destroying you. This is about building something real in its place." I turned, without another word, and walked out of the gallery. I didn't look back. I could hear the eruption of shouting behind me, but it sounded very far away. As I stepped out into the bright, salty air, I took a deep breath. It was the sound of my own breath. Calm, steady, and finally, completely free. The fallout was predictably messy. In a small town like Port Blossom, gossip travels faster than the tide comes in. My family immediately launched a campaign to paint me as a vengeful, mentally unstable monster. My mother told her friends I'd had a breakdown, that my success had gone to my head and I was lashing out over a childhood misunderstanding. My father mumbled to his golf partners about my being ungrateful. Stella took to social media, posting old, unflattering photos of me with captions like, "Some people never heal. They just choose to hurt the people who love them most." So sad. For a while, I'm sure some people believed them. The Beaumonts had spent a quarter of a century curating their image of perfection, and it was a powerful narrative. But truth, I've learned, doesn't always need a megaphone. Sometimes it just needs to seep into the cracks. The first crack was Theodore Finch. When his old friends asked him why he would sell to me, he told them the simple truth. He told them about my vision for the space, about his weariness with Beatrice's vanity, and about how he'd always thought I was the one in the family with real substance. The second crack was a man named Jed, the old fisherman who had found me on the road that night. He was a man of few words, but immense integrity. He overheard the rumors in the local tavern and quietly set the record straight to anyone who would listen. Left her in that wreck, they did, he'd say, shaking his head. Drove right off to their fancy party. A person doesn't forget a thing like that. The truth didn't explode, it percolated. People started remembering things: my mother's sharp tone, my father's dismissiveness, Stella's self-absorption. The story of the cancelled gala, once a tale of my cruelty, slowly transformed into a legend of comeuppance. The Beaumont family's carefully constructed frame began to splinter. Their friends stopped calling. Their invitations went unanswered. Their social standing, built on such a fragile foundation, quietly crumbled. Meanwhile, I went to work. I hired a local contracting crew, and we began the transformation of 14 Tidal Street. We stripped away the cold, white gallery walls and exposed the building's original, warm red brick. We pulled up the severe concrete floors and sanded and restored the beautiful old-growth fur beneath. We installed huge windows that flooded the space with natural light and the salty sea air. My project, the Hearthstone Collaborative, began to take shape. It was the antithesis of the Beaumont frame. We built affordable studio spaces for weavers, potters, painters, and metalsmiths. We designed a main gallery space that would be free for local artists to exhibit their work on a rotating basis. We built a classroom where we would hold workshops for children and adults, from life drawing to printmaking, all on a pay-what-you-can model. It was a space built not on prestige, but on community, on creation, on warmth. The grand opening was a year after I had walked out on the cancelled gala. It wasn't a gala at all. It was an open house. The whole town, it seemed, turned up. The space was filled with light, laughter, and the smell of sawdust and fresh paint. I didn't give a speech on a podium. I just walked through the crowd, talking to people, sharing my vision, feeling the incredible, vibrant energy of the community reclaiming the space as their own. I saw Jed the fisherman in a corner, smiling quietly to himself. I saw Mr. Finch, his eyes shining with tears as he watched a group of children paint at a low table. I saw faces I recognized from my childhood, now looking at me not with pity or suspicion, but with a quiet, profound respect. I didn't do it for them. I did it for the quiet, lonely girl I used to be. I did it to prove to myself that you can build something beautiful and strong out of broken pieces. A few months later, a letter arrived at my condo in Portland. The envelope was addressed in Stella's familiar, loopy handwriting. I opened it with a steady hand, unsure of what to expect. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an accusation. It was just one sentence, a question scrawled on a plain piece of paper. Was it really that bad? I held the note for a long time, looking out my window at the river. There was no bitterness in the question, only a deep, hollow confusion. It was the question of someone who was just beginning to wake up from a long, gilded dream and was blinking in the harsh, unfamiliar light of reality. I didn't know if I would ever write back. Perhaps reconciliation wasn't the point. The point was the peace I felt in that moment. I hadn't ruined a family. I had escaped a toxic dynamic and, in doing so, had inadvertently held up a mirror. What they saw in it was up to them. My family was a chapter, a painful, defining one, but it was closed. I had written the rest of the book myself. I looked around my sunlit home, my dog asleep at my feet, blueprints for a new community arts center in another small town spread across my desk. I thought of the warmth of Hearthstone, the sound of creation filling the rooms. I took a breath, feeling its calm, even rhythm in my chest. It was the sound of a life I had built with my own two hands. And it was more than enough.